Hey everyone, my name is Will and this is Josh from the Jackson Hole Community School. And today we're just going to be discussing how to write congressional legislation.
Hi. So there are two main types of legislation that we'll go over today. This is what you'll usually run into in congressional debate. The first will be a bill, which is what you think of when you think of Congress doing something. It's an action item. You write a bill that is doing an action, you're appropriating the funds, you're assigning an agency, going through all those steps. Whereas a resolution, you can consider it more passive. It's Congress coming together and agreeing, okay, we like this thing, we don't like this thing, more of a statement. And that will use whereas clauses as opposed to a bill is primarily using sections. And those will both make more sense as we go through this process.
Yes, and there is a third type of legislation, constitutional amendments, that we will not be discussing in this video simply because of how rare they are. However, we're hoping that the formatting tips you learned from this video can help you if you choose to write a constitutional amendment. So that being said, we're first going to discuss how to write a bill. And the most important thing to start off is by having a title. So perfect. Josh just copied it in. And as you can see, whenever you're writing the title of a bill, you say a bill to basically do something. For example, a bill to ban unpaid internships, a bill to sanction Saudi Arabia, for example. And generally, to keep everything uniform, we want to have this heading in Times New Roman, size 18, and bolded. And we also want to make it double spaced, the entire bill double spaced, which you can do by going to the help function and searching double, and you'll click line spacing double. Sorry, everything for the header except the header. Sorry, everything except the title. Anyway, so the next step is to write this statement that just says, be it enacted by this Congress here assembled that. And so this just says Congress wants to do something. It's obligatory in every single legislation you write. So from here, you're actually going to create a table. So here you go to Insert, Table, and you want it to be 1 row, 3 columns, just like so. Also, when I misspoke earlier, everything except the title will be double spaced. So here is what we're going to do. We're going to have the first column just show numbering. Then the second column will show the sections. And the third column will show the actual text of the legislation. And this will make a bit more sense as we go through it. Perfect, as Joshua just copied it in. So you're always going to start with section 1, which just states the new policy in a brief declarative sentence or as in few sentences as possible. For example, you could say, this legislation will ban the use of unpaid internships in the private sector and institute a minimum wage in replacement, for example. And for however long it goes, let's just say, you type a ton of stuff and it goes on many lines, you can just adjust the sections however need be, and same with the numbering. Anyway, with that being said, the second section you'll have in any piece of legislation will define any ambiguous terms inherent in the first section. So these will be things like, what is an unpaid internship? Or what is, military aid? What is Saudi Arabia, for example? And if you have more than one definitions, you can write them as such with just in the format A, and then B, C, D for as many as necessary. And we'll show at the end of this a sample piece of legislation. Then the third section gets into the finer details, which names the government agency that will oversee the enforcement of this bill, specific enforcement mechanisms, so that'll be things like punishments in case this bill doesn't get passed, in case, someone decides to ignore this legislation, for example, or if you want to think about funding, just all these smaller details. Then section 4 will be indicating the implementation date / time frame. And finally, section 5 This will always be the same. You just say all laws in conflict with this legislation are hereby declared null and void, hence giving this legislation, binding power. Now, once this piece of legislation is done, what you're going to actually do is get rid of these black lines. Because we don't like black lines, we want to make them invisible. So the way you can do that is by left-clicking on your mouse and holding Shift at the same time. And you can click on all of these lines as I am doing on my computer here. Perfect. And so what we can do, as if you follow my mouse, is we can change this to white. Therefore, we get the nice structure with the numbering on one side, the sections, and the policy without having any problems with formatting. So let's look at an example piece of legislation that demonstrates all of these principles. A bill to remove nuclear bombs from Turkey. We have the be it enacted by this Congress here assembled, that part. You have your section 1. You have section 2, which has A, defining what the DoD is, and B, what B-61 nuclear bombs actually are. Section 3 goes into some more details. Section 4 gets a time frame, and Section 5 declares that all legislation in conflict, all laws in conflict with this legislation are null and void. Finally, at the end, you'll actually want to say something like, respectfully submitted by representative, whatever your name is, and your school, just so people can attribute an author to this legislation. So next, we'll discuss resolutions, which Joshua can discuss a little bit further. I'm going to create a page break just to discuss it here.
Awesome.
Where my cursor is.
Let's see. I think I'm actually on the page below the DoD bill, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah.
Right. So the process for writing a resolution is fairly similar, which is, I'd say, the technical process. So that's why I've already pasted everything in. You still have the same amount of columns, 3 columns. Your heading is in the same size font, 18. The main difference here is in the actual content of the legislation. So for a resolution, instead of having your straightforward section 1, 2, 3, which all have assigned things that you're already going to be putting in, a description of the bill, enforcement mechanisms, ambiguous definitions, all of that. With a resolution, you actually have a little more freedom in what you write. You can have a resolution with just a single whereas clause. You can have one with 7, which is what we've got here. You can have one resolved at the bottom of the screen if you can scroll down a bit, Will. And you can also have further resolved, and you can have really as many of those as you want, just limited by that 1-page rule that you want to stick with when writing congressional legislation.
Yeah.
And
actually, just to emphasize, never go above 1 page.
we'll be very upset if you do.
If you are running over 1 page, you can bend the rules a little bit and say spacing 1.5. But if you can't fit it in a page after that, you need to make your bill more concise, or resolution.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. These bills aren't meant to be a massive declaration. The real substance, the argument, should be in the authorship speech that you'll give later on. In reality, you're just outlining the basics of the argument here and what you want to accomplish. I think the best way to describe a resolution is going to actually be looking at an example, which we have on the next page. And this is a resolution that Will actually wrote, condemning the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, which was a really hot topic last year in congressional debate.
As you can see, the whereas clauses mainly just start to explain what the situation is, elaborating on it and explaining why it's so bad in these many, many whereas clauses. And finally, it goes to the resolved section where it has an action, which says by this Congress here assembled that. And then you have some sort of action that you would like to urge. That's not binding, however, representatives. And then you can say further resolved, which are just extra pieces of actions that you might want to include. And one thing that Josh did not cover, however, in the formatting of these resolutions is we actually typically don't have one row. As you can see through my highlighting, for each whereas clause, what I've done is I've had a different row for each one of those, just because it helps separate these different sections. So with that being said, we do hope that you understand how to write legislation, and we wish you great luck.
Thanks for your time. And if you have any more questions, you can always reach us or the rest of the Jackson team. Go through Londi, go through your coach. Always happy to help. Thanks.
Thanks.